Hi everyone, Tia here from Order of the Bookish. Thank you so much for being here for another author interview. I have AJ Titter here, and she is the self-published author of Tarnished Relics, which is an amazing, epic, young adult fantasy story that I'm so excited for you guys to hear more about. So AJ, can you tell us more about Tarnished Relics and how you got into publishing in the first place?
Sure. So Tarnished Relics is a medieval sword and sorcery fantasy. It has a prophecy, and the chosen one has to make a decision between justice or revenge.
Okay,
And
which one does she choose? Can you tell us spoilers? Which one?
um, well, in this first book, it's probably more on the revenge side, though she doesn't quite think so. But there is going to be a sequel, and that's going to delve a little bit more into that as well. So
And so is the sequel Torched Feathers that I see behind you?
it is not. Torched Feathers is actually the free prequel that when you sign up for my newsletter, you can get.
I love that you have a newsletter. It is so important for authors to have newsletters. And for any authors watching this, the fact that she has that free available story in her newsletter is called a lead magnet. And I highly recommend all authors, one, have a newsletter and also put something like a short story as a lead magnet to entice people to sign up. That's such a good marketing strategy to have. All right, so diving more into your books and a little bit about the marketing, what have you done to sort of get the word out about your books? I know you have some social media, you have this newsletter, which is great. What has worked for you and what hasn't really worked so far?
I think honestly, the newsletter has probably worked the best. So I do use Story Origin. I know a lot of people also use BookFunnel. But having one of those kind of behind you and helping you and being able to do like newsletter swaps with other authors, that really helped build a good base and a foundation. And then I have seen probably the highest engagement on Instagram. And I would actually say probably Pinterest after that. Um, so I would say those are probably the top three for me that I feel like where I spend my time and my efforts in marketing. So,
As someone who focuses on author marketing, you have just checked off all of my boxes. Like the two things that I always say is do Instagram or TikTok, whatever you're comfortable with, and then Pinterest. I feel like anyone who's not using Pinterest and they're trying to sell something is really missing out on a lot of opportunities because when you post a pin today, in 3 years from now, you can still get traffic and views and clicks from that pin. And you don't have to engage. It's not time consuming. It doesn't like take all your energy. Whatever you post on TikTok or Instagram, you can also post on Pinterest. And it's just like, it's so easy and I love it so much. So I'm so happy to hear that you have that too and that it's working. So do you have any kind of strategy when you are posting pins? Do you just like use whatever you have on Instagram or do you make pins specifically for Pinterest?
so I do a bit of both. So I do some pinning basically of what I've done on Instagram. But then I do some, I would say, more specific to Pinterest, and it's usually a bit more geared towards the world of the book.
Mhm.
So it has a lot of images of like character references and like place references to kind of immerse the reader in that world. So,
I love that. I'm a visual person, and as a reader, I really like to just get into the mind of the author. So if I'm able to go and see everything come to life, like the book trailers, character arts, world, location art, that makes me really happy because then I feel like the film going on inside my head becomes even more realistic and accurate. So, talking more about your book, I saw on your website that you call yourself a born again Christian. Can you tell me more about what that means to you and how that's reflected in your story?
yeah. So to me, that means that I believe that, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, that he did come to earth, was born, died, and rose again. And so then I have that hope now in him that I will continue on afterwards. And I think how that ends up in my writing is I do have a lot of those kind of ideas, not necessarily like blatant, in your face, because I don't necessarily write the story to be Christian, but it does influence my writing. So, I mean, part of that is even with this Tarnished Relics being so much about like justice and revenge. And there is a little bit in there too about like the free will because of being the prophecy and a chosen one versus, fate and kind of what's already laid out for you. So I think kind of in some of those more overarching ideas is how it shows up. But then even in Tarnished Relics, part of how I even got the idea was the Nephilim in the Bible, and like what would it be like if now, or I guess technically in the medieval times, there were people that still had like those special gifts that would have been possibly passed down through the bloodline since they were kind of part angel. So
Yeah, that's very interesting. I love hearing stories about that. And there was a long phase within the publishing industry where angels and demons were a really popular trope and theme in books. And I would like to see that come back because I feel like the world is getting a little bit more divisive. And now we are starting to talk more about like demons in Hollywood and all that stuff. So I would like to see that pop up in books a little bit more often. And I was raised Catholic. So anytime I see those kind of elements and themes show up in a book, I can't help but think back to, CCD and my Fused Communion and everything. And I'm like, wow, these stories are relevant even past the point of me being like a preteen. Like as an adult, they are all over the place. And we've seen some really popular books with those very similar themes. Harry Potter, for one, The Chosen One, evil and good, prophecy, demons, and Twilight as well. We have themes of that in Twilight. So those themes, whether you're religious or not, are always going to be relevant. And I think always going to be interesting to readers no matter where they are on their religious journey, if they're religious or not. That's a really good, like, strong base and foundation to have in a story. So when you were writing, were you more of like a pantser or were you more of a plotter? And how did you build this world? Because world building is hard. I'm a fantasy writer myself, and that takes a lot of work. What was your process for building all that up and then finally putting it together in your story?
I'm definitely a pantser. No planning involved, or I would say very little. Like maybe after I've started writing some, then I'll be like, oh, maybe I need to actually like, so I don't have plot holes later or something, just jot down some things so that way I have them. But as far as the world building, especially for Tarnished Relics and this world that I created, I drew a lot actually from not only like medieval, but the 18th century. So I am a history lover. I actually have my bachelor's in history. And I did for a long time do historical reenacting for the French and Indian War.
Like,
So because I already had so much basis in that, like the clothing and all the different like items that would have gone with it and kind of knew that world in a sense, I used that to really draw on from there. So in a way, I guess I kind of cheated because I just did what I knew and I didn't have to come up necessarily with a ton of fantastical details.
mhm. So why did you choose to go the fantasy route instead of like a historical romance route? Because I feel like if you study history, from all the authors that I know who have a similar background, they tend to write more historical fiction.
Um, I think I didn't necessarily want to be pinned in by that.
Hmm.
While I do like any story I think that I've ever written has a lot of uh, historical elements from different time periods or cultures.
Mhm.
I didn't necessarily want to have to like stick to that specifically. And I'm working on another book that is more historical set in the Edwardian era. And I feel like all the research that has to go into it, definitely not my favorite. I don't know that I would ever do another one that's going to be so historically based.
Yeah, I fully understand. I've started to recently get more into history, and conspiracy history, and the research that goes into just learning more about that is so intense. I have so much respect for anyone with a history background because you have to be so precise. Because readers, if you're not precise, will come for you, and it's scary. So, what kind of history, besides your religious background, have you put into Tarnished Relics? Because you said you did reenactments. Are any of your reenactments anything like the dress or the fashion or the way they act in your books?
Yeah, so the kind of history of Tarnished Relics is um, there's a lot of medieval elements, more in the buildings, I would say, and in the actual setting. But where the world is right now is a little bit more forward than that and is kind of more that 18th century. So kind of the gowns, especially like what Atoria wears, the main character, that's more based on like the 18th century with, having the stays and the pockets underneath your gown, um, and going ahead and trying to set up a historical background for the world itself. So, kind of leaning into that and looking at the different points in history and what would have been before, and there is now. So,
Okay, very interesting. So in talking about your book more, I do want to hear more about what your book is about and also how did you come up with these names? I know I get my inspiration for names from Pinterest, believe it or not. I love seeing the images come up with like the name and it'll have the origin and the meaning. Those are some of my favorite posts on Pinterest. So where do you get the inspiration for your names for your books?
so Tarnished Relics actually started as a cathartic book after my divorce. And so I initially used a lot of real life names. So Atoria was actually just my name, Amanda. And Daniel actually stayed Daniel, which was my ex husband. Um,
I love
and
that.
I was like, I'm just going to write it. So I didn't want to do too much with the names at that point, but some of them did make sense in the beginning, the route that I was trying to go with the book. Um, like, because Amanda does mean like she who is to be loved. And then Daniel was, God is my judge. So they did fit. But of course, as the story kind of evolved and went a little bit more away from kind of a romantasy, um, it was time to change some of those names. So for Atoria, that actually, I basically used kind of like a name generator. I still wanted it to have kind of similar meaning and definitely wanted to still start with an A. And so I kind of just put some of those things in and it just gave me, a couple different options. And so I was like, I think that's going to be the one that, just kind of fits. But I typically do, and a lot of the other names in the story, they do have meaning. I think it's important to have your characters have meaning with their name. And it doesn't have to be necessarily very deep. But I do find that that is something that I tend to gravitate towards is what the meaning actually is.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that you mentioned that. I actually just recently published an article on the Order of Bookish website all about names, how to name your characters, where to get inspiration from, and the importance of meaning and to like really get down to what the meaning is because what something means in one language might mean something else in another language. So you don't want to accidentally be calling your main character like a snake when really what you want to call them is a woman of peace, and the meaning of it. So I think understanding the meaning and the origins behind words, especially as authors, like is something that we need to be more hyper aware of. And I like that you consciously put those into your stories. It sounds like you say you're a pantser, but you seem to be a plotter because everything you're telling me is yes, it might be like long-term plotting, but you seem to have gone into this with a very clear strategy at the very least.
I would say, I guess in that sense, when you say it that way, yes, I guess big picture, I
Mhm.
do have somewhat of a plan and a way that I want it to go.
Yeah.
I think that can be helpful as far as, knowing at least the general ending that you want in your book. Because then you can write towards that instead of like you have no clue where it's going at all. And now once you get to the end, you're like, now I got to rewrite everything before that to make it fit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess in that sense, overarching, knowing where the book's going, yes, I typically do have a plan, but it's all the stuff in between.
So as you were writing, did you do any like major rewrites or did your characters just go off on their own and you were just the divine hands to write it all down? Like how was it being a pantser? And did you have any struggles with that?
I did. So there were actually three major rewrites for the story. And part of it also was just a learning process because I had never, well, I shouldn't say never. I technically have one other book that is finished, but this was really the first one that was like complete, like knew I wanted to publish it. So I didn't necessarily have all of the training behind me. I had done some creative writing like in college. But other than that, it was kind of just writing and see where it goes. And um, thankfully, the editor that I had, she was really good about like giving me feedback and like even narrowing it down. She's like, if you don't fix like anything else, she's like, fix these two things. Just go through the story and make sure that like these two things are always there. And like one of them actually was like, character agency and like making sure that the main character was actually driving the plot because that was a lot in the first one where it was like everything was just happening to Atoria and she wasn't actually like making any decisions or doing anything on her own. So that was an expensive lesson, I will say, because of course, paying an editor to go through that, like three times. But I think it's going to make me so much stronger, especially the way that the editor was with her comments and, working with me. It's going to make me a stronger writer in the future.
So I really want to talk about now the image that you have behind you, which is very cool. It's very branded, and I'm so happy that authors are now starting to realize that they need to have a brand. Can you tell me more about your brand, your logo up here, which is really cool and fascinating, and just how you have mashed all that together and stayed consistent with your branding?
Sure. So that was one thing. I did a lot of research like on the publishing and the marketing and as I was writing Tarnished Relics. So that was one of the things that came up a lot was like, make sure you have a brand, like have a professional logo, make sure you have the website, you get the newsletter, which I think is, of course, all really good information. Um, and I actually didn't think about the logo right away. I actually had seen another author who all of a sudden she started to have a logo. And I was like, So I kind of asked her about it. And then I basically just went on Etsy. I found somebody who was doing logos and they worked with me. And we went through some different options. And this one felt right for what I intended to write. So it's, AJ Titter, author of Magic and Myth, and having that kind of the myth with like the history and mythology, but then also having the magic of the fantasy. So that's how we kind of came up with that. And I think knowing already what I wanted my brand to be in that sense of like history and myth and the fantasy helped because I didn't have to like come up with the logo and then make my brand fit that. So I would say some pre-planning on that end is probably a good idea if you do want to write.
I think it also just helps keep everything together as you grow in your author journey. And to any authors or aspiring authors watching this, whatever your logo is now and whatever your brand is now can grow with you. Like if you start off as a young adult fantasy and then you get into historical fiction later, your branding can grow along with you. It's not a problem. I feel like a lot of authors sort of feel trapped and caged in when they start creating logos and brands and stuff like that. But it's totally flexible and you can experiment. And I love what you did with your logo. Like the AJ Titter, the writing of it, it looks like ink, which feels very on brand as a writer. Feels just like it's nice and clean. I like it.
Thank you.
So, can we talk a little bit about what you had to do as a self-publishing author in order to just get your book out there? Because you had to get the logo, you have cover design, you have editing. What were all the phases that you had to go through just to get your book published?
I feel like it was a lot. And I think you don't think about how much it's going to be going into it. You're like, yeah, I just write a book, upload it to like Amazon, like I'm good to go. But yeah, it definitely, writing, like I said, it went through three major edits. So I feel like that took probably a year and a half just on that because, your major edits being like it pretty much was rewritten at least twice.
Mm.
So, and then going, like you said, getting that cover designer, um, the other types of edits. So, of course, the big edits were like developmental edits, but then also doing like the copy and line edits to make sure that grammar was correct. Um, then things I also didn't think about was like how hard it could be to actually upload your, especially for the ebooks, because I did go ahead and decide to publish wide. So, like, Apple gave me the hugest problem, and I couldn't figure out like why it wasn't allowing it to upload. Turns out that my imprint image was too large, I guess, for Apple's upload. So, but I didn't find that out through Apple. They didn't help me at all. It was actually when I went to upload the physical book to Ingram Spark, and they were like, FYI, this is just a little bit large. And I was like, I bet that's the problem for Apple. I changed it and it worked great. So yeah, there were just, I feel like a lot of little things that I didn't think about, especially going wide, because it wasn't just like putting it up on Amazon. So
Yeah, that's good to know. And so you decided to go right instead of doing Amazon. What was your thought process behind that choice?
So I debated for a while about that because a number of authors like I had followed and been reading, they decided to basically just do Amazon, do Kindle Unlimited. They got great results through that. And then there were some others that, of course, went wide and they were getting great results that way. So I kind of decided I wanted to go wide for a couple of reasons. Um, One, I did want to go ahead and be able to sell signed copies of my books and eventually do like a book box and things of that nature. So that made more sense to me, to want to go ahead and be able to sell direct.
Mhm.
The other reason actually was kind of more on the whole piracy issue that's going on because I had known some authors that they were on Kindle Unlimited and then their book ended up on some pirate sites, and then Amazon bots were basically like, you or breach a contract, and like it was a mess. And so I was like, I don't want to have to deal with that. I do wonder now sometimes, I'm like, I wonder if, especially first starting out, first book, like not really anyone knows about me, should I have done Kindle Unlimited to start
Mm.
and then possibly gone wide after that? Obviously now I'll never get the chance to see like what that would have done for me, but I do feel um, like going wide. I don't know that it hurt me in any way. I was actually very surprised by how many people purchased my book like within the first, I would say first month, but even probably less than that because it released December 10th, and by the end of December I think I had uh, right around 40 copies sold, which I thought for first time author, unknown, to me, that was really good. I didn't have that high of expectations at all. So,
That is really great. And I think everything that you've been doing to promote the book has really been working because you have the branding, you have a gorgeous cover. How would anyone not want to have that cover on their bookshelf? And you have the newsletter, the website. You have a sale going on right now on your website. So I think all of those little things individually and then put together is definitely helping you see success as an author. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the next book come out. Do you have any information you can share about the next book? Are you in the process of writing? Do you have an expected release date? When can I buy it?
So one thing I will say that I learned throughout this process with Tarnished Relics was not giving out too much information ahead of time, at least definitely the publication date. Because again, when I first started this, I had already done, I don't know how many self edits. So I figured when I sent it off to that developmental editor, I was like, get it back, we'll be good. Like, so I was telling people it was going to be out like, later that year, earliest the next year. And then like 2 years later now is where we are when it actually came out. So I am doing things slightly different. And what I've kind of decided to do, especially since Tarnished Relics is so new, is that I'm kind of leaving that as what I'm marketing on like Pinterest and Instagram. But then through my newsletter, I am starting to kind of whet people's appetite with the next book and sharing excerpts from that and some of the history behind it. And kind of using that as getting those people who are my more dedicated fan base, I would say. So that way they're not bored with everything around Tarnished Relics that they've had for like 2 years now. But yeah, I'm writing this year. I'm writing right now that Edwardian novel, which it is a fantasy still. I would say it's anyone who liked Penny Dreadful. It's kind of along those lines.
Okay.
So working on that. I'm also planning on working to the sequel of Tarnished Relics. And so this year I've kind of dubbed as my year of writing. So my goal is basically write, edit, probably write more, edit more, and then go ahead and publish sometime next year and probably publish both of them. We'll see how far along we get. But what I do want to do with Tarnished Relics, I knew that I should have had more lead time for getting some of those like ARC reviews and even like doing editorial reviews. But after like 2 years of working on it, I was kind of like, it just needs to get out there. So I was like, I know I'm not doing that for my next books. I definitely am going to like have it completely done, like everything, and then go ahead and start doing like ARC reviews, editorial reviews, more marketing leading up to it. So that way I'll have probably a 3 to 6 month like marketing window, I guess, before it even comes out.
Yeah.
And one thing that I did find interesting, and this is where I feel like the newsletter really helped as that kind of base, like I had mentioned earlier, is I didn't do any marketing as far as like specific purchasing pre-order marketing for Tarnished Relics before it released because I didn't really plan on doing a pre-order. And just from like newsletter and some other things, but not true marketing, I did have like 11 pre-orders. And that actually really surprised me. So I definitely want to do that for any future books is have like a pre-order phase as well and actually do more marketing during that time as well for pre-orders. So
that's such a great idea. For any authors, I always recommend a month of pre-orders and then 1 to 2 months leading up to the pre-order period. Just do like as much marketing as you possibly can in that time period. And then you launch the book and then another like strong month of marketing. So like, I know it's exhausting and authors generally don't like to do the marketing process. I do because I'm super weird, but it's like a good 6 months of pre-release, release, and then post-release of just market the book and try to make those sales. It sounds like you have a perfect strategy in place. Like truly, you're doing everything right, and I love to see it. AJ, thank you so much for being here. I've loved talking to you and getting to know more about Tarnished Relics. I'm going to log off, and I'm going to go buy your signed paperback, which is currently on your website. It's probably not going to still be there by the time this video goes on YouTube, but if you ever have any additional sales going on your website, let me know so I can tell everybody about it because this just is amazing and I love it. So thank you so much for being here and for publishing such an incredible story.
Well, thank you. And it was great to talk with you.
Yes. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching another author interview. I'm going to put all of AJ's links below so you can check out her book, sign up for her newsletter, and do all the things that you know authors love to see. All right, guys. Thanks so much for coming. Happy reading and happy writing. Thank you so much for tuning in to another author interview with me. I'm Tia at Order of the Bookish. Make sure you subscribe to all the Order of the Bookish channels for more updates on news, trends, marketing tips, and self-published authors and their books because we have so much coming this year and you don't want to miss out on any of it. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for the next author interview coming next Friday.